Good evening, Alan Temple. Guess what? We are back and we are live. And I am so happy to be joining you tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Jacqueline Thompson, Senior Pastor of the Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland, California. And I am so glad that you have joined us tonight. So as usual, I want to welcome you wherever you are joining us from. We are glad that you are here. As you all know, Theological Thursdays developed in response to issues in the pandemic. And so we decided we were going to take an online opportunity to deal with all of the issues and challenges that were being raised by the pandemic. But they were so good that it just stayed on, even though we're post-pandemic. And so it provides us with an opportunity to continue to raise those issues and discuss issues that affect our community theologically and from a biblical perspective. And so we are gathered here tonight to do just that around a very important, overdue, and much needed conversation. So as usual, I'm going to give you an opportunity, text somebody, call somebody, share this on your page, send the link, ask are they on. You can certainly see us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube because we want to make sure that this conversation is as far reaching as it can possibly be. And so the conversation we're going to have tonight is around what you do when love hurts. This conversation and this subject matter has hit our congregation very personally, very intimately. I want to give a disclaimer before we start talking that some of the issues that come up, some of the subject matter, even the subject matter itself, you have to decide if it's appropriate for children. I certainly recognize that our young people, some of our younger people are struggling with this issue as well. As amazing and incredible as that is, it's true. But we also want to make sure that we are doing the best we can to protect our children from being introduced to issues before it's necessary. And so with that in mind, I want to establish just a bit of context as to how we have come tonight to this particular conversation. And so with that, I want you to take a look at something.
Now in the case of a woman whose remains were found on the Alameda shoreline. Her fiance, 54-year-old Joseph Roberts, appeared in court today, but did not enter a plea to a murder charge. Alameda police say the body of 27-year-old Rachel Buckner was found in the water near the Park Street Bridge on July 20th. She was wrapped in tape and her head, hands, and feet were missing. Authorities say they believe Roberts killed Buckner in their Pleasanton apartment before dumping her remains in Alameda. Alameda's police chief says investigators had little to go on when the body was first discovered.
We started this case with nothing, and through round-the-clock work, through the use of technology, through the use of forensic evidence, we were able to identify the victim, and through further investigation, we were able to identify the suspect.
Roberts is being held without bail. Buckner, a Howard University graduate, had finished her first year at Golden Gate University School of Law. Her family told KTVU her death has left a void that is indescribable in her community and village.
And so we are here tonight because we were Imani's community and village. She was one of our church babies that we were very proud of, born and raised in our congregation, as all of our young people that we try and support, that we try and elevate, gifted, talented, had graduated from Howard. We certainly know the entire Buckner family, her brother who's away in college now. And so we were devastated as a community to find out that this had taken place, in particular, a faith community. So there is no way that we cannot have a necessary conversation to deal with the issues that are facing our young people. And so the purpose of the conversation tonight is threefold. One, it's just to raise awareness and understanding. We are not naive. We understand that violence happens in our households, in our marriages, in our relationships, even with our children. So we want to increase awareness and increase our understanding. We want to make sure that we are providing access to the best resources. And we also want to dismantle the stigma, because some conversations we are not necessarily comfortable with having as people of faith. I shared with a few folks that in some churches, we've been wearing masks long before the pandemic. when it comes to particular issues. And so I'm so very honored and delighted to have someone for whom this is their passion. This is where they've been trained. They are an expert in this area. I need you all to help me welcome. I need to see it in the chats and your comments. Help me welcome Dr. Pam Tate. And she is a native of San Francisco. She is currently the co-executive director of operations and education at Black Women Revolt Against Domestic Violence, which is a family violence resource center serving families in San Francisco. She provides training throughout the state, I dare say the nation, and one of her unique moments where she is proud of was establishing a faith-based roundtable where she actually trained clergy and staff of churches on how to deal with this issue in their congregation. So when the issue with Imani happened, she reached out to Imani's mom, who forwarded that information to me. And I told her what was on my heart, what I felt we needed to do in this moment. And she has bent over backwards to be with us tonight, to accommodate us and to have this conversation. So I just want to welcome you. Dr. Pam, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate all of the sacrifice that you have made to be with us and for the empathy that you displayed, because the loss of Imani is a loss for all of us.
For sure.
And so this is definitely a conversation that we want to have. And so can you help me welcome? Are you in the chat? Just type in the chat, welcome. I know I may not be able to see all of them, but if we see, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I want her to know that we are here and that we appreciate her presence. And we hope to have some more guests moving on in a few moments. So can you start, and I'll just speak for me, and I pray that my reflection is reflective of those who will be joining us. And so we hear the phrases domestic violence, and we hear now intimate partner violence. And in many contexts, it just becomes a catch-all. So can you educate us when we hear those phrases? What are we describing? What is domestic violence? What is intimate partner violence?
It is violence that is put upon your partner, your intimate partner, your life partner, your temporary partner. I think a lot of times when people hear domestic violence, there's the old rule of, oh, but they don't hit me. That is not all that domestic violence incorporates. So we're going to go through all of those things. We start off with emotional violence, where, withholding affection or being emotionally abusive, name calling, patterns of breaking down people's self-esteem. Then we have physical violence, where, physically hitting someone, going to be graphic. Sexual violence, having sex with someone without their consent. They say sexual violence when we're referring to domestic violence, but is another form of rape. So that is the appropriate word. Then we have financial abuse, which is someone who is overtaking your finances. You might be with a partner and have a joint checking account, or you might be the stay-at-home mom who has no access to cash, who's isolated and does not have access to cash to do something as simple as get a haircut or to take your children to get ice cream without getting permission or money from your partner. Then we have spiritual abuse, which we are finding coming up a little bit more, where people are being abused within the church. Sometimes it's with clergy, sometimes it's with other leadership members in churches. And then finally, technological abuse, which we're also seeing an uptick in, particularly with younger people, revenge porn, things where now they have AI. There's artificial intelligence where they're able to swap heads on people's bodies and displace those heads and put them on other people's bodies and then spread that as if it was the person who's pictured. We're seeing an uptick in that as well. And I know a lot of people kind of go, domestic abuse, again, you think in terms of someone physically being hit, but if someone is suffering from domestic abuse or intimate partner violence, more times than not, they are currently being inflicted in two ways. It's never just they hit me. It's never just they were emotionally abusive. Things start off with isolation, pulling people away from their families or their church or their friends. And that would be a form of emotional abuse. And then the next thing might be, physical abuse or withholding money, where they can't go out with friends or go and visit a friend or a family member because they have no access to cash to do that. And then will come the physical abuse, where it's kind of like menacing or physically harming. And then it just kind of runs the gamut from there. But the main thing that usually starts that you notice would be isolation. People who
So
normally,
it's a scale often that it
yes,
doesn't immediately necessarily start with physical
for sure.
violence, but it can start with small things, isolating you from your friends
Mhm.
and family, or not wanting you to take
Yeah,
place in your regular activity.
exactly.
And it's interesting that you mentioned, Lord, I said God does all things well, that you mentioned technological, was that the phrase,
Mhm.
technological violence? Because I just read a story, family, I think it was day before yesterday, of a young man who ended up taking his own life. He's
Mm.
in high school. He was a senior about to graduate, but he's a gamer. And so he was caught up in a scam, just gaming, playing a video game. And he ended up sending, pictures, thinking that he had met someone and starting this
Right.
online relationship. And then they threatened to release it to his family and friends. And his parents had no idea until he had taken his life. And so I
Right.
say that to say that we have to be mindful, even with our young people and their friends and what they're listening to, and the TikToks and the Instagrams and all the rest of
Right.
that, and as well as the gaming community. So I thank you. I thank you for that. And so, how prevalent? We hear statistics that say 1 in 3. We hear statistics that say 1 in 4. But how prevalent is intimate partner violence, domestic violence for men and women nationwide?
Nationwide, it is 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men. And we also need to say that it is grossly underreported. People don't generally come forward and just cite that I'm being abused. A lot of calls will come from a neighbor who heard the noise, or men just generally tend not to report. So they're saying 1 in 7, but when you see people in the hospital, the numbers are usually higher than that. But again, we do need to remember people underreport.
And are those statistics comparable for African American community, or do they change when it gets
Ooh, they
to
change
us?
significantly, and again, we tend to underreport, we don't snitch. And so our numbers, here's an example of why Black Women Revolt was founded. Was San Francisco has less than 5% population African American. Depends on who you ask, they'll say 3.9% to 4.6%. Yet 39% of the domestic violence calls involve someone who has self-identified as Black. And I want to repeat
Mm,
that. Less
yes.
than 5% of the population, 39% of domestic violence calls involve someone who has self-identified as Black.
Wow. Wow.
And those are underreported numbers, because more times than not, those are disturbance calls from a neighbor who has heard a disturbance, not someone self-calling for assistance.
Wow. So this is a problem long overdue that we need to be
Mhm.
addressing on every front. And so I want to take a pause here because I set the context earlier. I showed you a picture and played the clip and story of one of our church babies, and her mother has decided to graciously join us tonight. And so we all know Deaconess Jamila. If she's on, I want to give her opportunity to join us tonight. Good evening.
Good
Thank you
evening.
so much. It is good to see you. I know you had to rush to get home, but I'm glad that you made it. And so we certainly wanted to give opportunity to you. So you are welcome, Deaconess Jamila. Let her know that you're
Hi.
there and that you're engaged in your comments. Let her see you and know that we love her. Deaconess Jamila and I grew up together. So we
Yeah.
old school, right? Pre-babies, pre-marriage, all of that. We grew up in church together. And so it's challenging because church is family. Church
Mm-hmm.
is family. And so this has impacted us all in a very special way. But if you could do something for us and just help those who may not have had the blessed privilege of watching Imani grow up in church, or even being able to identify, help us know Imani. Tell us something about her.
Yes, thank you so much. And Dr. Tate, it's a pleasure to see you. Um, and just hearing some of what you were sharing. Imani, I thought about this, and Imani followed a family motto, which is faith, family, and friends. And in that way, when I think of Imani, She was a very spiritual person. That's what the kids call it these days, right? When they love the Lord, they know the Lord for themselves. But she was a very spiritual person, a very sensitive person, but she was also someone who always looked out for the underdog, right? From the time she was 2, all the way as she was growing up. She was bright, she was funny, she was engaging. She loved to express herself in a number of different ways. She was a visual artist, although she kept that under wraps. And then she was a spoken word artist. She loved to express herself. And, I think that anyone that really knew her knew that she was a woman of heart. From a family standpoint, she also loved legacy. She followed into her family's footsteps. Her name is Rachel Elizabeth Imani for a reason. She was named after her great grandmother on her father's side and her great grandmother on my side of the family. And then we chose Imani, me and my late husband, Robert G. Buckner IV, because we met at Allen Temple and we were married. And it was by faith that we were together and that we were blessed with our firstborn, together. And she took right after her family. She finished her doctorate of jurisprudence just July 20th of this year, right? And that was following in the footsteps of her aunt, following in the footsteps of her grandmother who had her EDD, following in the footsteps on my side, just really excelling in all that she did. She had so much promise. And so, to be in this place is just heart-wrenching, very heart-wrenching.
We can't imagine, but we certainly want you to know that we love you. We love the entire family. And for those of you, who may not remember and what her mother did not say, because I know she doesn't want that as the focus. Imani was beautiful, tall, statuesque, like her father, absolutely could have been a model, and just a wonderful young woman. And she was also a mother, also has a beautiful daughter. And so, Jamila, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to stay just for a few moments. I'm sensitive, that this is your child. And so I don't want to trigger anything, but I want to ask a question. And I think I want you to weigh in on this question as well before you give us your closing message. So Dr. Tate, this question is to you. I think part of what has been so devastating, knowing that there are other issues and other stories in our congregation, right? If the statistic is true, 1 in 3, 1 in 4, we're a large congregation. 1 in 4, that is staggering. And so I think that there's a misnomer about the kind, hear me, air quotes, the kind of people or the kind of women or the kind of men that experience domestic violence, right? And so there are some who thinks it's a particular class or you have to come from a particular kind of family. And so I think part of what has devastated so many people and have them saying, how in the world did this happen? Is because this is someone who in our minds, right, checked all the boxes, did everything. And so how do you speak to that? Is there, we know that it knows no person, but how do we help people understand that everyone can be susceptible?
Well, I want to start off by sending my sincere condolences to, I always say my D9 sister, Miss Buckner, because this has touched me greatly as well. I think part of the problem I mentioned earlier is how, Blacks, we tend not to snitch. We really try and keep things within our home. We don't want to burden other people. We don't want people in our business. This is not new. Domestic violence has been documented as far back as 733 years before Christ in the Bible. This is not new. We're just not talking about it. It's a silent epidemic. It knows no class. It knows no caste. It knows no religion. It knows no ethnicity. This has been happening before Christ, and it is documented in our Bible. And so when we think about that, and we think about all of the years that we have not talked about this, when we think about the way that Africans were brought to America, and that is part of our history, and the violence that occurred in that, and how we got to here, and how families were broken apart, and how violence was used to control, right? And how that has been perpetuated in our families. And so again, we're quiet because we had to be quiet, but we don't have to be quiet anymore. So if anyone knows anyone, or if anyone is experiencing it, it's okay to open your mouth and say something to anybody. When I'm in community, I often will say things like, if you know of someone, so I'm not as offensive in speaking directly to someone. But if you know of someone, we leave materials around, and I'll say, oh, please take our relationship pledge. We have a healthy relationships pledge. But on the back of that card, I say, and if you know anybody who might need emergency housing or needs to talk to someone, please feel free to share this card with somebody. We have to start talking.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you for mentioning in context that this is in our Bibles, because I had shared with the congregation that there are texts known as texts of terror. And they have been written about by a feminist theologian by the name of Phyllis Tribal. And she writes about 4 in particular. So you know I'm going to give them to you because it's Theological Thursdays and we have to just have a little bit of Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Genesis, we have the story of Hagar, who was an Egyptian slave, who ended up suffering all kinds of abuse that you described earlier in this conversation at the hands of both Abraham and Sarah. Both of them together. There is another text that is found, I believe it's around Judges 11, where you have the Jephthah's daughter, where he ends up killing her, dismembering her, sending out her body parts, right? This is what she's referencing when she's saying it's documented in the biblical text. We have the sexual assault, R word, I'm not even sure we can say it, I don't know, but y'all know what I'm talking about, of Dinah. And all of the implications of that, right? And then you have the unnamed woman, the voiceless woman of Judges 19. And so these are all specific texts. You're not really going to hear them preached over the pulpit because they're difficult texts for pastors and preachers and theologians to unpack. Because the reality is, if we say that art imitates life, then scripture reflects it both in its horror and in its holiness. But if it's present, it's because it was happening. And the same is true today. So part of the goal of this conversation as well is to make sure that our congregation becomes a safe place for people to be able to say, this is what's happening, or this is what I'm experiencing. Or if you sense something, because we see stuff and we sense stuff and we look at people and say, no, so-and-so didn't look right today, right? But we leave it there, or we say, oh, I'll be in prayer. But we want to be better at being a safe place and communicating and being active and helping to rescue men and women, not just women, men and women from these challenges. And so with that, I'm going to segue back to you, Deaconess. And so if there is a hope that you would have for this conversation, or if there was a message, because I shared with you as we were engaging this and I was mulling and praying over it, that the goal is not to objectify Imani. That is not the goal. The goal is to use this as an opportunity for this to have greater impact. So many of her peers, so many of her friends, so many of her family are suffering as a result. And we do not want this to be in vain. So if there was a message that you would want to give tonight to those who are listening, or just a hope for this conversation, what would that be for us?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to ponder on that. I think that the first hope is what we're doing tonight, which is beginning the conversation and beginning to speak. I know for myself that I didn't speak early enough. I didn't share early enough. And so my hope is that we create a safe space for people who need help, or who are confused and don't know what to do or where to go. You know, and my hope is um, for people to stay engaged if somebody's in trouble, or if it's not right, if you're interfacing with somebody that you've known and their behavior has changed for some reason, and you, instead of getting offended, my hope is that you say, wait a minute, this is not of God, this is not of their normal character, and really try and be there and really support.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the staying connected part, because what I said over the pulpit was what my concern was, is if we are a net, then what happens if someone falls through? And so, Dr. Tate, just for context, I am, and I think our church is no different than any other church, right? And so we have amazing youth ministry. We focus on young people. We put them up. We try and train them, read scripture, you know, all of that, give them scholarships, send them away. That's what we want. Go off and be great. Fulfill your purpose. And so I was one of those, and then got to school. It was like, I'm never going to church again, right? Because you had to go every Sunday. You had to participate. So you go through this season in your life where you explore other relationships and you form other networks and, you know, explore other sides of yourself. It feels so natural. And then eventually you get older, life changes. You want a relationship, you settle down, you want to give birth. You kind of find your way back, right? That's generally been the pattern we're accustomed to, never thinking what could happen during that time when they're disconnected. And so I'm just feeling like I have to launch an all-out ground attack to reclaim this kind of group of young people who no longer feel connected. And I say that because I remember saying to our Pastor Emeritus, well, I don't feel like I have a place. I'm in this in-between stage where I'm kind of too old for the youth and I'm too young, you know, for the unity choir or the adults. There was no place. And he literally on the spot said, whatever you say we need to do, that's what we'll do. And the fruit of that still lasts today. And I'm feeling like we need to do that more so that people don't fall through the net that they're actually connected to. So thank you for that, Deaconess. And so, of course, you are welcome to stay and join us. You can stay on screen, backstage, or you can log off and listen. It's up to you. But I know what this must have done in order for you to even come on and greet us. So will you help me again in the chat? Just let Deaconess Jamila know that we appreciate her being here, your transparency around this issue. It is so deeply personal. And be reminded, Allen Temple, as we prepare to celebrate her life, and it will be a celebration of life that will take place next Wednesday, after we vote, November 8th at 11 a.m. And so again, I thank you. I thank you. I thank you. I thank you. And so, Dr. Tate, I want to just kind of trudge on a little bit if we can, and you can let us know. So it happens in the context of relationship, right? That's what we've established by definition. And so the question that people usually ask, that we have to ask and address, is why do people stay? And does this idea, maybe our misunderstanding of what love really is in your experience, how has that contributed? We know sometimes people say children, they say finances, they say all kinds of things. But then I've encountered other people where they say, but I love fill in the blank.
Love. My grandmother used to say that it's one of those old tales where she'd say, you know, people who are loved well, love well, and people who are not loved well, love poorly. And so, you know, you might see people who come from a two-family household, a two-parent household. I had two parents. My parents were married and together for 42 years. And yet I got into a relationship where my partner or husband was financially and emotionally abusive. Never hit me, but then started to venture out and kind of started to be abusive towards my kids. And I was just like, that's the deal breaker. It's time to step back. Um, we love people and we love them how we've learned how to love. And sometimes we think we can heal people with love. And we have to really just accept God's love is the perfect love. We're all trying to get to that love, but we can't heal people with our love. God's love heals.
Thank you so much for that context, because I think you're 100% right. And so I'm going to say, somebody type in the chat for me, 1 Corinthians 13, right? Let's put that there, have that as your reference. Because the other thing I wonder is whether or not you mentioned how we were brought to this country. And so I'm wondering about, and for those of you that are theologians that are viewing us tonight, the role that our history in this nation has played, and even our role of Christ on the cross. Because I think Black folk in particular, recognizing that domestic violence knows no ethnicity, race, right, or gender. But we do make a connection between suffering and love, right?
We do.
We have this concept of struggle love. You just want to struggle love. We gonna be together. In my day, and we was ride or die, and that meant whatever I had to go through, what are we doing? Are we robbing banks today? Okay, let's rob banks today. Are we going to school today? We're going to school. And so that notion persists almost with every generation in different forms, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering the ways in which we kind of perpetuate some of these situations by not being clear about, you can't heal a person, change a person, transform a person,
Right.
with your idea of love. Any thoughts on that?
We shall try.
We
We surely try. Yeah. Someone wrote trauma bonding. I'm sorry, I'm listening, but I'm looking at some comments, and these are some really good comments. Intergenerational trauma bonding.
And
I
can you
think
speak to that? Because I know that's part of your work. That's part of your degree work, is in trauma and early childhood education. So someone said trauma bonding, but what is that for those who may not be familiar?
it's, I'm trying to keep it real simple, for being like when you actually are attached to someone that is traumatizing or harming you. When you have bonded yourself with that person, sometimes people say soul ties, but when you are connected to that person, and it's really hard to explain. The trauma is what connects you, but you would think the trauma should be the thing to separate you, but they cling to the trauma because that's the bond. They're bonded with that
And
person.
so would an example be, so let's say I've lost my mom, right? I've lost my mom, and I meet someone who's also lost their mom. I haven't necessarily worked through my
Exactly.
grief over the passing of my mother. And so when I'm triggered, it comes out in certain ways.
Right.
The person that I've met has not. But because we share that connection, that, he
Right.
knows or she knows
We
what
become
I'm
life
going
partners.
through, right?
Yeah.
And so instead of connecting on the things that are healthy and would cause a relationship to grow, we kind of connect and bond on the dysfunctional.
Right.
And I dare say that trauma bonding is not just about romantic relationships. Some of us got friendships where we are trauma bonded.
Right.
They don't serve us. They don't benefit us. We don't benefit them. But
Yep.
we connect over the fact that one time when we were 15, your mama put you out and you came and spent the night at my house,
Exactly.
right? Even though there's been nothing built on that relationship. And so can we deal with and answer the age-old question that always comes up? In your experience, why do you stay? Because we all say, if it were, I'm not going to let nobody, right? We all have that. If it were me, I
Right.
would fill in the blank. We all say that
Yes.
until it's us. And then, we say, why didn't they leave? Why did they stay so long?
There are a myriad of reasons. I'd say the first thing is love and that ideology of what is love. They love the person that they're with. Sometimes they don't want to be wrong about the person that they chose to stay with because what's my mama gonna say? What's my brother gonna say? What's community gonna say? I don't want anybody to know that it's as bad as it is. And that's that saving face. Then there's I don't know or genuinely have people who are gonna care. We go to church. I know I go to church and people say, "How you doing today?" I'm fine. You're not fine. We're not fine. We're not always fine. But why can't we say that we're not fine? It's okay to not be okay. But when you go into church or when you go into work, I'm fine. And so there's some of that. And I think about part of it is the way that we are interacting with each other. And so that's one. We talk about love, we talk about finances. Let's keep it real. We are in the San Francisco Bay Area. I stayed in a house with my ex-husband for a year before we finally moved separated from each other from a physical space because we couldn't afford to move with 3 kids in the house. But somebody needed to go, so I had to get it together to go. But I mean, the Bay Area is expensive. And then if you
Very.
think of mothers who stay at home with kids and don't have full-time employment, how are they going to go? I have a staggering statistic of here in San Francisco, we only have 77 emergency shelter beds. Most
In
people
the
who
whole
come to
city?
shelter, 77, and
Oh
most
my
people who come
goodness.
into shelter come with children. So it's not just one person occupying a bed, that's one person plus 1 or 2 children. So that's 3 people. As soon as you take one person in, you've got 3. You have a 6-week stay. Where do they go?
Right.
Who's going to help them? If we can't go to someone, our brothers and sisters in Christ in church and say, hey, we're having a problem in the house. I need to not be here because they're embarrassed to talk about it because nobody's going to care when they talk about it because don't nobody want to be in somebody else's space. Right.
Mm-hmm. And so let me transition. I wanted to do 2 things, but now that you have said that, so what should people be looking for? Are there red flags? What are the red flags?
There
Um,
are some.
Please let us know. What are the
Yeah.
red flags?
The first thing I was really thinking about Sister Buckner when she made the comment of seeing things earlier. I think we all see, and this is not blaming anyone in any kind of way, shape, or form. Sometimes we have this internal thing that we say when a sister's hair isn't together, we know something is wrong. They might have came in today and just, swagger wasn't the same. Your hair might not have been as great as it normally is, or you look like you were rushed this morning. Um, Ask them, are you okay? And don't listen to the I'm okay. How are things going in the house? How are the kids doing in school? How are you guys doing as a couple? How are things going in your finances? And we need to be able to do those things and not feel like somebody's being nosy and also expecting some pushback because, people aren't used to talking and being real. But if you see something, we have a responsibility to take care of each other in church and outside of church. And so if you see something or suspect something, ask. If someone gets offended, right? Then we, say, I'm asking in love. I'm not asking in gossip. I'm not asking to hurt your feelings. I'm saying I'm here if you need to talk. I'm here if you need something. I want to be here for you. I noticed that you haven't been coming around. I noticed that you seem a little bit more distant than you usually are. I noticed that you seem sad. I notice that you seem angry, or I notice that you seem withdrawn. Is there something that I can do to assist you? Maybe we can go take a walk. Do you want to go do a prayer walk? Maybe we can just go and have coffee. If you want to talk, we can talk. If you don't want to talk, I can just sit here and be with you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. And so I also, Alabama has had an anger management program for a number of years. And we are one of the court appointed anger management programs, always quite busy because we were also one of the most reasonable in terms of folks being able to afford to complete the classes that they had been ordered to take. And so I wanted one of our anger management facilitators to join us, but I do not think he is with us tonight because, again, I just want to stress that this is a non-gender based issue, right? That it happens on both sides. But one of the questions I wanted to ask him, which I will ask you if you're able to address it. If you're not able to address it, that's fine. But I'm just wondering for those aggressors, right? Those perpetrators, male or female, if in your time and your experience in engaging, are there any commonalities? Is there any substance to the conclusion that most persons who end up being abusive have been abused? Is that a true statement or is that kind of misnomer?
Statistically speaking, usually yes, but there are also people who break that cycle. There are people who recognize that, they've been harmed or they've experienced harm or they've witnessed harm in their household, and they really go out of their way to not perpetuate that. But a lot of males, particularly, I actually do training for Men in Progress, which is a batterers intervention program through Guide Memorial Church. And we, some of the things that we notice is not just physically children being abused, the impact of witnessing domestic violence also has the same type of impact as if they were doing it themselves.
Mm-hmm. And so with that, again, as you have said, if you know any aggressors or batterers in your circle in any context, what counsel would you give them? They may not have reached the point of court yet or reached the point of police intervention, particularly if we do not report it. We're underreporting. But right? You know if you've been violent, if you're being aggressive, if you're any of those things that we named earlier, emotional, spiritual, financial, technological, we know. And so if you know of someone, what counsel would you give to that person for them to begin to break the cycle and seek that help on their own?
The thing is, we can, like they say, take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. The first thing I would say is, again, the same approach that you had as I spoke earlier. Say, I'm noticing you seem a little bit more angry, or what's going on with you. And if you're a woman and don't feel comfortable doing that, tell a brother at church, go and talk to one of the deacons at church, or mention it to the pastor, or say, I'm noticing something. There's a shift in this relationship between these two people, or I notice that he is coming off as very aggressive, or I notice that he seems withdrawn or, agitated. When was the last time someone saw him at Bible study? Do we need to follow him or see what's going on at work? And again, this is all being ideological, but it's like, we got to start checking in on each other and not be satisfied with just hearing, I'm okay. Because clearly
and so
people are
again,
not
just saying
okay.
something and saying something is critical on both sides, for the person who's a victim of abuse and for the one who's potentially an abuser or an aggressor. And so your highlight of your work has been working with the faith-based community. And so the reality is, this is just my opinion, there are others who may feel different. There remains a lot of stigma and a lot of shame around these kinds of issues and other issues. And so in your work with the faith-based community and the counsel that you've established and the folks that you have trained, how can people of faith, churches, organizations, clergy overcome some of that stigma and shame so that this becomes, we talk about this the way we talk about grief or the way we talk about other things that we contend with in our faith walk in life?
Well, it starts off with the clergy. And so I want to applaud you for even being willing to have this conversation, because it's an uncomfortable conversation. It requires us to not just look at the congregation, it requires us to look at ourselves and think about, have I ever witnessed domestic abuse? Have I suffered from domestic abuse? Do I know anybody who's been involved in domestic abuse? Did I help them? Did I know how to help them? Did I want to help them? Did I walk away from helping them? Addressing the issues head on and being truthful in that. And then I think the next thing is, once you've established that, we have to humble ourselves, because I've been guilty where I've walked away and let somebody go, and I go, I know this is not good. My first experience seeing somebody with domestic abuse, I was 8 and I didn't understand it. I was in my friend's house and all the ladies just kind of gathered up the kids and we all went up the street to a different house because my friend's mom and dad went at it and they were like, everybody got to go. But I saw that. I didn't really understand it, but I saw that. And so us being honest and saying this isn't healthy, hopefully this isn't happening regularly, but if we witness it, don't act like it didn't happen. And that starts at the pulpit, so then we can talk about it in the congregation.
Indeed, indeed. And so, Reverend Charlotte, I know we wanted to give opportunity to those who are viewing us tonight. If you all had questions, I don't know if questions have come in since we have been talking, but I think we have a few moments to be able to address some of your questions tonight. I know they can see comments. I can't see them, but if some questions have come up, please type them in the chat, whatever platform you're using. Hopefully, Reverend Charlotte can put them up and we can get those questions answered before we prepare to close out. This has been a wonderful conversation, a wonderful educational conversation. I feel like there's going to need to be a part 2 because there are so many things that I want to ask that I have not been able to ask. And we certainly want to get to the point where we give counsel to those who may be experiencing intimate partner violence in this moment, as well as make sure we provide folks with available resources, trusted resources in these days and times. And so hold on. Y'all know how I am when I get on live. So let me look, because I get text messages as well. So let me take a look and see what someone is saying. More comments than questions so far. She's monitoring. Okay, so again, put your questions in the chat. Reverend Charlotte will put them up as they receive them. She said it's certainly more. Okay, are church officials mandated reporters?
I'm going to leave that to someone who's in church. I know some people will say that they have a confidentiality clause in being a faith-based leader, but also it's the same thing with me as a domestic abuse advocate. I am not court mandated, but we have our own code where if someone is reported harm to themselves or they're planning harm for others or have harmed children, we will report. We start off with that conversation. It's like, even though I am not mandated.
No legal code necessarily that applies to clergy, but I think clergy is bound by morality, right? Yeah. And so we are called to do no harm and to also ensure that others are doing no harm. And so in my case and instance, if it is something that I'm aware of that I know is harmful, you can best believe it. Mm-hmm. So I can't speak for other clergy, but Allen, for y'all know me, you can bet.
Yes, ma'am.
And, recognizing, because you don't want to traumatize the family, you don't want to expose them or cause more harm or create a dangerous situation. And I hate to use a cliche, but it really is one of those, what would Jesus do? And so I know that there have been situations, I had them when I was in DC, when I was working at Shiloh with young people, where literally the person was traumatized at the idea of it being shared. And so in that instance, because we thought it would do more harm, my work was to constantly encourage them almost daily to take that personal step and promise them that I would be there to walk them through it. Because in that instance, the fear was, you're going to report, then you're going to walk away. And then I'm going to be left to deal with whatever the repercussions are of this situation now being exposed. And so mandated in the sense that a social worker is, or that a teacher was. When I taught high school, I was a mandated reporter. No, to my knowledge, clergy is not mandated in that sense. But you know who is on the line? Reverend Dr. Bonita Kitt is on the line. I saw her in the comments. And so, Dr. Kitt, if that's something that you could speak to, could you please put that in the chat and make sure? But we certainly have a moral mandate. And we certainly have a theological mandate, in my opinion, a biblical mandate as it relates to that. Yes, we are. So we are legally bound. Thank you for that. Please clarify for us. Sister Rochelle, see that comment. Other questions that come up? All clergy in California, oh, of elder abuse. Okay, so here's the comment. All clergy in California are considered mandated reporters of elder abuse. This means that if any member of the clergy suspects an elder is being abused, he or she must contact Adult Protective Services. So I get it for elder abuse. I'm not sure about domestic violence, and I think that's also true for children, right? If there is sexual abuse and if there is physical abuse that's going on there. And so I would say you could take that as your code. Clergy could certainly take that as their code of conduct and their standard in that regard. Thank you, Sister Rochelle, for that question. That was a wonderful, wonderful question. Is there training or framework you recommend for faith leaders, Dr. Tate?
Yes. There are a couple of things that can be done. There's like a DV 101, which is just basic introduction to domestic violence. But personally, what I would love to see, and again, this is just because it's my soapbox, I would love to see every congregation to have someone trained in the 40-hour domestic violence advocate course. It runs a great gamut of things. It gets into legal confidentiality, privilege, restraining orders, local resources, the impact of trauma, teens and domestic violence. It's got like 16 different topics, and it's very expansive. And I think that it's a good basis as part of any ministry of a church. And I get that churches have all kinds of ministries that they are doing, but I think a lot of them are just not even aware that it's an opportunity that they can take and incorporate into family ministry or into the women's ministry, for leadership, or even having pastors take it. My first pastor who took it has done so well and really, really appreciated taking it. He actually brought a group of congregants from LA and pastors and lay ministers, and we did the first faith-based roundtable out in Oakland about 4 years ago. And he has since gone on to do the Duluth training for batterers intervention. He now works with the Alameda County's district attorney's office as an advocate.
And is that Bishop Williams?
Yes.
We was hoping he'd be able to join us tonight as well. And so we are certainly grateful for all of the work and for that training. And so we will be in touch, because I'm sure if the question came up, that means that the interest is there. And so we look forward to growing and expanding as a congregation in that area, and making sure, again, that we are a trusted resource and we're dealing with accurate information. And so if there are any other questions in the chat, let's put them up now. If not, I want to make a transition, an unplanned transition, but I want to make sure no other pressing questions that are in the
see
chat.
a question.
Okay, let me know, because I can't see it. So
it's a good one. How do we talk to the young people? Amen. And thank you for lifting that question, because we are seeing a lot more domestic violence at that age, which is very scary. My daughter just graduated from college, but when she was a sophomore, they had an incident where a kid, two kids, first time boyfriend and girlfriend, the boy punched her in this field off of their track, and a couple of kids saw it, and it opened up a whole conversation where we did a girls group and we did a boys group. And the things that kids are experiencing today are things that I never experienced even as a 30-year-old adult. We have kids taking other kids' debit cards and taking control over teenagers' money. We have kids who are being sexually assaulted, kids that are participating in drugs, or innocent pictures with boyfriends that are now on websites that they can't get scrubbed. There is so much that we don't think about in terms of kids, and people go, oh, they're too young. We have 12-year-olds who are pregnant. It is not too young to start talking to kids about what a healthy relationship looks like. And if you're not in a home that has a healthy relationship, please get somebody that they can model, because they're talking about relationship goals with places that really are not something to model. And so I'd say talk to them directly. And I know a lot of times kids don't want to hear from adults. We have something in our job where it's called YAC, it's Youth Advisory Council. And we are actively taking college students and juniors and seniors in high school and asking them, what does a healthy relationship look like? And some of them can't identify what the healthy relationship looks like. And then we talk about, well, would this seem like something that would be part of a healthy relationship? And, initially they kind of look at you like, oh, that was dumb. I can't believe you asked me that question. And then they go, well, no, I wouldn't want somebody to hit me, or no, I wouldn't want somebody to call me stupid, or no, I wouldn't want somebody to tell me I can't see my friends or go and visit my cousin, or calling me 20 times when I'm on vacation with my parents. And so, getting them to kind of like reframe and think about what is healthy and what's unhealthy about these types of behaviors, so that when they are experiencing these things as they get older, that's their red flag, and they go, that's not healthy. You can't start too early.
Excellent question. And being intentional about gathering, right? Because young people tend to share better in a group environment than kind of one-on-one. If you ask them how they're doing one-on-one, they're always going to be fine. Everything is
exactly
good.
And with younger people, because I recognize in my 55-year-old body, ain't nobody trying to have that conversation with me. But Taylor, who is our youth advisory advocate, in her 25-year-old body, they go, okay, she's not quite old, but she's in my range. So
and being mindful of the ways that their social media is normalizing violence. One of the biggest stories that is going on in the internet right now is between a young man and a young woman. I'm not sure either of them have hit 20 yet. And it is about how basically he dragged her out of a car, beat her up, locked her in the house. She did a whole video, face all bloodied. He did a video. People are following the story because they like the personalities, right? And so the more we begin to normalize it, the more challenging it becomes amongst young people. And so, not seeing any other questions, y'all may see them before I do. So make sure any other questions, if we want to make sure we handle them. Let me say this. We will come to you, Dr. Tate, on if someone is experiencing domestic violence, what they can do tonight. We want to give resources. But before we do that, I want to make sure that you understand how close to home this is for us. And so I've asked someone if they'd be willing to share just a little brief portion of their story at whatever level they feel free to share, just so we can get it. And so if that person's willing to do that, you're free and welcome to do that at this time. I don't know how to operate. There you are.
I am willing. Hi, Pastor Dr. Tate, my beloved sister, Deaconess Jamila. Many of our Allen Temple family members probably remember a blog post I wrote for our I Believe campaign, and where I shared that I am a survivor of intimate partner violence. And you really can't even say that he was an intimate partner because we weren't even dating. He was someone who would escort me to various work events and whatnot. And one night, everything changed. And after a physical battle for my life, this is right before I moved home and came back, right at the same time Pastor came back. The first thing I want to say is that survival is possible, but only through God. The second thing, it took me over a decade to wrap my head around it. I'm good now, but a lot of therapy, a lot of prayer, a lot of being with myself. To my brothers and sisters in Christ who hear stories or see someone, just as Dr. Pam shared, someone who's not okay, ask them. There were times on Sunday mornings in church when I was doing communications work that could have saved me because I was right on the edge. I am grateful for the prayers of my mother, who it took me a long time to even admit to her that it happened. At that point, I had one master's degree. I was a vice president of an international company. I checked all the boxes of everything should have been okay, and it was not. Educate yourself, even if it is being a physical presence and doing what I do, keeping an 800 number for domestic violence services in your cell phone. The conversations you may have may save someone's life. because there's not just the event, there is the living after the experience. Pastor, thank you for letting me share. That was the very Cliff Note version of it. But I will also make myself open to Allen Temple family members, friends, people who know me. If you need someone to talk to you, find me. Now I'm upstairs in the balcony on Sunday mornings or running around. I will stop my running around. I am here because I have lived it.
And I thank you for your willingness to share, because I will say this. Charlotte is another childhood friend since high school, back when she had a Beretta and I had a Camaro Z28, right? And so we're rolling around the Bay Area, happy that we can drive. And so she's right. She came back. I think I came back after she came back. And Dr. Pam, it was a lot of what you said. And I would say to her, you are different. Right? I would say, what is going on with you? You are different. What is happening? And she was up in the booth and isolated and didn't necessarily want to be touched. Don't just let me come do what I need to do. And I kept saying, something is going on. Something is going on. Something is going on. And so when she finally shared, everything made sense. But I say that to say, don't ignore it. Don't walk away. It's uncomfortable. They may not share with you immediately. They may not say. But if something is in your spirit and you can't shake it, it's something to it. So continue to pray for that person. Continue to be present for that person. I don't know if it's good to be like me and continue to pester that person, because I did. Something is happening. But thank God, that we are on the other side of that. And so with that, Dr. Tate, can I transition to you? If there is someone who is having that experience tonight, what can they do? Where can they go? And I also will make a request that we'll follow up with later. We hope to have on our website a full list of resources, hopefully, certainly by this time next week. But for immediately right now, what can someone do?
I'm going to give them two resources. One, that list that you're asking for is on my website. So blackwomenrevolt.org. We didn't do the against domestic violence because it's too long. So just blackwomenrevolt.org. If you go to resources, it's throughout the state. And anytime we get additional resources, we add them. These are people that we have worked with or are in community with and know someone who's used them, as well as through the national hotline. And that is the other number I'm going to give you. That 800 number should burn a hole in every person's cell phone. That would be my wish. It is for the national hotline for domestic violence. It's a 24/7 hotline. They have English, they have Spanish, they have MLAM line, which is a multilingual line, where if you even speak Russian, they can get somebody to speak Russian. They have dialects of African dialects. So that number is 1-800-799-7233. And then
Someone
also
put that in the chat, please.
They did.
Platform.
It's
Okay,
right
1-800-799-7233.
Okay. And the greatest thing somebody can do for me, and in honor of Imani and my friend Tammy and her friend, my other friend Rose, which was my oldest son's classmate who was killed by her partner, and he also killed her mom, Rose. They're getting ready to go to court. I would say the best thing and the most wonderful thing someone could do to honor them, that is as simple as putting that 800 number in your phone. Because if someone asks you, you can pull that number out and say, these people will guide you to resources. It might be a shelter. It might be safety planning for them to figure out how they're going to step away from this relationship, how they're going to get resources in order to take care of themselves and their family. And that number again is 800-799-7233.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tate. Thank you, Deaconess Jamila. Thank you, Reverend Charlotte. We have gone over our time, but what a rich conversation. I pray you all have enjoyed it. I am going to ask you to share it. You know you're going to get this link by email so that if you did not see it, you can watch it again and you can share it with someone else. And while I am talking, let me just commend our Street Disciples ministry. We have a ministry, Dr. Tate, called Street Disciples, and they work with persons who have been trapped in trafficking. And one of the things that they've been able to do in some instances is to literally find safe places for people to be able to stay in order to begin the change in their lives. But while you were speaking, I'm reminded that those resources are even few and far between. And so it presents a challenge for us in the areas that God may be calling us to expand our ministry and our footprint and what it is that we do. Because it's difficult to tell people to leave and they don't have nowhere to go. And so that means we have to take a look at the property we own, the resources, what's around us. Because, you know, I believe nothing is impossible with God. I believe if there's a vision and a mission, that the Lord will finance it. And God has that, I believe, campaign was proof of that the Lord will do that. And so I pray, Deaconess Jamila, that your heart has been comforted slightly, even just the slightest bit by this time tonight. And again, I said our goal was not to objectify Imani, but rather to use her life and her situation to empower others and to open our eyes as a congregation as to what we can do to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. So thank you for joining. Thank you for staying.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you
Because this
so
has
much.
been a long night. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And so with that, we are going to sign off. This has been Theological Thursdays Live. We are so glad that you have been with us. Help me close. Put in the comments. We thank you, Dr. Tate. There will be a round 2, and we'll have to find out about that round table and see how we can get involved, or at the very least start with that training. I also want to lift up Dr. Benita Kitt because she is doing a wonderful presentation as well. This is an area and scope of work for her. So Deacon Johnson, I got your text, but never fail. Never fail. This will be a round 2 because we do need to hear from the brothers. We need to hear from the men. And so there may be occasion for us to deal with some of the members of our anger management program and see if we can begin to deal with this silent epidemic, as you have called it. We love you all tonight, and I thank you all for your support. Again, share, post. You are welcome. We love you, and I will see you all this week. Thank you, Reverend Charlotte. Good night.
Good night.